The Yakuza series and its fanbase have drastically changed over the years, especially in the West. We've reached a point where most of the games are fully localized, either officially or through fan projects, and they're even playable across various different systems. Yet, when you have a franchise with over 20 different games to its name, it's natural that some of them won't be as present in the community's discussions as you'd hope them to be. In certain cases, the lack of popularity is understandable, as games like Kurohyou, Dead Souls, and Kenzan have only been released on a single console each, and not everyone will want to bother with emulation to experience them. Naturally, there are also some linguistic issues present, which were thankfully lessened with time thanks to fan translations. However, even with these limitations, these games still have a notable presence in the community, unlike the game we will discuss today. This is a title that is fully localized, available on modern PlayStation hardware, and has all the makings of a great Yakuza game, yet it is rarely, if ever, actively brought up in modern fan discourse. Today, we'll be talking about Fist of the North Star: Lost Paradise, one of the most unique games that RGG has ever made. For those who may not be aware, the manga this game's story is based on will be celebrating its 40th anniversary tomorrow, so this felt like the perfect time to talk about the value that Lost Paradise carries for both that IP and Yakuza as a whole. With that in mind, we might as well start by addressing the biggest question around this game immediately, as yes, this is in fact a proper Yakuza game, and you need only look at its Japanese namesake, Hokuto ga Gotoku, to see that. While the different art style and characters may confuse newcomers at first, there's actually a ton of overlap between these two IPs that will make Lost Paradise feel like a Yakuza game with everything turned up to 1,000,000. Take for example the relationship between the first two characters you're introduced to, Kenshiro and Shin. The two of them were portrayed by the voice actors for Kiryu and Nishikiyama respectively, and they have an eerily similar backstory as our favorite Kyodais. Shin is a childhood friend to our protagonist, but eventually turns on him to win the heart of a girl they both love. Kenshiro himself is a man of few words who lets his actions do the talking, with his unshakable beliefs and strength making him a beacon of hope for everyone that meets him. This game is full of such correlations, and with the way that they're presented, you don't need to possess any prior knowledge of the Fist of the North Star manga to actually enjoy Lost Paradise. To put it another way, much like how Ishin feels as if the cast of Yakuza participated in a historical stage play, Lost Paradise is basically that same cast acting out the story from one of the most iconic manga series of all time. But if you're more interested in the Yakuza games for their combat, you'll be happy to know that this game features the very last combat system RGG developed in the engine that gave us Yakuza 5, the original Ishin, Zero, and Kiwami. So if you loved any of those games, chances are that you might enjoy this one as well, as that classic design logic can be found everywhere, especially with the side content. Now that we're all caught up with the basics, let's finally see why this game doesn't get as much coverage as the other Yakuza games. When it comes to LP's lack of popularity, there are two ways of looking at it, from the perspective of the Western community at large, and the perspective of content creators who could share the game with them. As far as the community at large goes, it's understandable why many people haven't played it yet. Even though we all know RGG makes fantastic games, playing a title based on an IP you're not familiar with will naturally be a harder sell for many but the most hardcore fans. And keep in mind, this game was released the same year as Judgment, a game that looked like a much quote-unquote safer spin-off to try due to its visual similarity to the mainline Yakuza games. But let's say you wanna try out Fist of the North Star regardless, and you try getting into the source material. Well, you can either choose from a manga with well over 200 chapters, which have still not been fully localized to date, or you can watch a 150 episode long anime series with an 80s art style. As I've said earlier, you don't need to know the manga story to understand or enjoy this game. But back when LP dropped, you couldn't be blamed for thinking only fans of the manga would enjoy this game. And the entry point for it is as unforgiving as getting into Yakuza itself, as a newcomer. Now, obviously, if you're having second thoughts about playing a certain game, then maybe having your favorite content creators recommend that game could be just the push you need to eventually experience a hidden gem. But this is where the other major problem comes into play. See, this game is a copyright minefield, and I won't bore you with the specific details around it, but covering anything related to Fist of the North Star is basically like playing Russian roulette with your channel, thanks to a certain license holder on the anime side of things being very trigger happy and taking down hundreds of related videos because they can. This is why many content creators who talked about Lost Paradise frequently removed monetization on their videos around it and just prayed that everything would go well. But if your video isn't monetized, then YouTube's algorithm won't push it as frequently on their site, as the platform won't make decent money off of it. So even when there are videos being made on this game, chances are they won't reach a new audience because of that. To tie all of this back together, it's a lot harder to get the word on this game out there than you might have ever imagined. But with that woefully lengthy and boring explanation out of the way, we can now finally talk about why this game is so amazing, starting with the combat. As I've stated around 500 words ago, this is the last game to feature the engine most of us were introduced to in Yakuza 0. And while LP doesn't have multiple fighting styles to play around with, the amount of freedom you have while using the martial arts style titled Hokuto Shinken is euphoric. If I had to compare it to anything, it would be Kiryu's Dragon Spirit in Yakuza 5. You can transition from enemy to enemy extremely fast, and all of your attacks have so much weight to them that it's no surprise how every combat encounter ends with your opponents literally exploding. My favorite aspect is the added verticality that this combat system allows for. I remember how many people were excited about the juggling in Lost Judgment when it was first revealed, so when I started playing Lost Paradise for the first time and saw it here, my jaw just immediately hit the floor. I mean, look at how gracefully Ken can just juggle these dudes like he's playing volleyball with a balloon. He can do mid-air charge attacks as well, but the real bread and butter of this playstyle is everything that you can do with the circle button. The premise behind Hokuto Shinken is that you use your opponent's pressure points to defeat them from the inside out. So the team at RGG used the many secret techniques Ken showcased in the manga and essentially turned them into infinitely spammable heat actions. You don't need something like a semi-full heat gauge to execute them either. All you really need is to be observant. Sometimes you'll need to break a bit of your enemy's armor before going for the technique. Other times, a careful dodge is all you will need to crush your enemy into oblivion. And if all of that wasn't enough, a precisely timed input of the circle button can just erase your enemy of choice and leave behind an interactable font for you to use. This thing is even stronger than Kiryu with a bike, for God's sake. I freaking love it. Naturally, since this is a game released after Yakuza 5, you also have a form of extreme heat here as well, courtesy of the 7 stars indicator to the left of your UI. And I mean, just look at it. Even though you only have one style at your disposal, it never felt like this game lacked depth or that it became too easy to contend with. With the general enemy aggression and the variety of enemy types, you will find yourself using most of the tools you have here pretty frequently, because as overpowered as you can become in the end, this game's difficulty leveling will make you feel like you're just strong enough in nearly every encounter. And the boss fights, oh my lord. This is probably one of the most fun yet challenging sets of bosses I've ever played against in Yakuza. It's not so much due to their jaw-dropping damage output, but more so due to the added mobility they possess. I won't show the fights here to avoid spoilers, but for example, the boss that you fight at the end of Chapter 5 spent most of his time attacking me while he was airborne, and frequently did extremely precise dodges, to the point where it felt like you were watching two Beyblades clashing at ×10 speed. It was awesome. And since I've mentioned the bosses, this makes for the perfect segue into the next segment of the video, which would be the story. Making a good game around a pre-established narrative can be pretty difficult. If you follow the story to a T and just sprinkle in some combat encounters, the experience could feel redundant to hardcore fans of the series, unless your combat system is just that phenomenal. On the other hand, deviate too hard from the source material and you will never hear the end of it, should you mess up. So, what did RGG do with Lost Paradise? They did both, and the end result was honestly genius. See, while many of the key encounters that happen here have also taken place in the manga, the circumstances around them are altered in interesting ways. Since Kenshiro in the manga traverses the entire world in search for the love of his life, this means that many of the most notable villains were fought in vastly different locales, with little direct connection between them. So to avoid having to make 10 random maps with a fast travel option, RGG instead created a focal point for the entire story to revolve around, that being the City of Miracles called Eden. Now, why is this genius? It's because of the way that the original manga's world functions. In Fist of the North Star, the world has suffered a nuclear blast that erased most life on Earth, making basic resources hard to come by. Eden, on the other hand, is presented as a piece of civilization that survived the aftermath of the blast. And since they still possess a means of procuring essential resources to its inhabitants, it's obvious why everyone who's still alive in the world would want to enter its sacred walls. Here, you will come across villains trying to take over the city, people looking for a loved one who disappeared, and even Kenshiro himself will be drawn to it, as the love of his life Yuria was last seen in Eden. Not only is the justification for the city's survival genuinely believable, but the way many iconic manga villains respond to its existence is in tune with their core ideals. Eden isn't treated as this magical solve-all solution, but rather an evolution of the concepts from the source material, as was revealed in the latter half of this game. Even if you're a manga reader and know how Kenshiro fought and/or befriended the rest of the main cast, this game presents those encounters in a different light, as if you're reading the story anew for the first time. Arguably, the most admirable thing that was done in Lost Paradise is how several new characters were made specifically for this game, yet they still feel like natural parts of the pre-established world we've seen in the manga. For example, Kisana's design has that recognizable feeling of graceful beauty, reminiscent of a character like Yuria, a person that remained pure and goal-driven, even though countless people in the wasteland were quickly driven to madness and violence from the shock of the nuclear attack. However, once you learn more about Kisana, this image of grace we first envisioned is quickly flipped on its head, and deepened with a sense of fragility and tragedy that lies beneath. We've seen similar character blueprints all throughout the original manga, which lends her character a sense of credibility, and the way that blueprint has evolved in media after the manga's conclusion makes Kisana feel like a believable character in her own right. But easily the best addition to this game's story is the founder of Eden himself, Nadai. The legends surrounding him paint him as this strong, benevolent leader that, in retrospect, could even stand alongside characters like Kenshiro and Rao in terms of possessing an unshakable legacy. Yet, we know that no character in this series is truly flawless, and the way Nadai's regrets and burdens drive his actions in the world makes everything that he represents feel like this perfect entity of conflict. And to me, that feeling of conflict is what makes many of the most memorable characters in this manga so iconic. Case in point, someone like Rao. While anything can happen in Lost Paradise, the respect and reverence shown to the legacy cast makes this such a compelling experience, whether you're a manga reader or a complete newcomer. I understand how this can still sound like more of a reason for fans of the manga to play the game rather than Yakuza fans themselves, so Allow me to point out the following. Like I've said earlier with the case of Kenshiro and Shin, mirroring Kiryu and Nishikiyama, there are many narrative overlaps with Yakuza present. So even if you've never heard of Fist of the North Star, nor its legacy, hearing that a character is voiced by, for example, Ryuji, Shinada, or Yuya will give you the exact sense of familiarity you need to where you will indeed feel in control of the journey you're currently on. Oh yeah, and Kiryu's main love interest here shares a voice with Kaoru Sayama. That's all I'm gonna say on that front. Despite the English namesake of the game rejecting any ties to Yakuza / Like a Dragon, this game genuinely is in equal parts a Yakuza game and a Fist of the North Star game. And if you're still unconvinced after around 2500 words of me rambling, then look no further than the tidal wave of addictive side content. I will try to make this part rather brief, as with most of the content in these games, it's a lot more fun to experience them than to simply explain them. Essentially, we have two major areas to explore, those being Eden and the Wasteland. Eden is what you would expect of an average Yakuza district, being relatively small in size, but dense with content. The Wasteland, on the other hand, is a gigantic open field that will gradually become more and more accessible to you as you progress through the story. Now, when you first look at the size of this thing, you might think that either A, there's nothing worthwhile to do here, or B, that this would be a major pain to traverse. And these are fair assessments. As much as I love this game, the only reason why I went to the Wasteland was to grind levels in the late game and get some crafting materials. But while there is something really amusing about boosting 400 km per hour and looking for enemy cars to crash into, you won't really be forced into spending too much time here unless you go for the Platinum Trophy. And even then, you can still fast travel. Essentially, the bread and butter of your playthrough in this game will be in Eden. And this city of miracles toys around with the classic Yakuza formula in really entertaining ways. Obviously, you will still have access to a ton of your usual minigames, like casino gambling and Sega arcade games. But where this game really shines is its exclusive content, starting off with bartending. The premise here is that you will do specific button inputs to make specific drinks for customers, and the over-the-top nature of the animations reminds me of the telephone game in Yakuza 0 turned up to a trillion. Not only does it look over the top, but trust me, it feels that way as well. For example, one of the actions that you need to do to make a set of cocktails will be to vehemently shake the controller left to right. And once you get to a level 3 drink, you'll be praying that either your controller doesn't fly off to Asgard, or that your arms don't tear away in the process. Between that and the accursed right stick spinning inputs, you'll find yourself getting as shredded as Kenshiro by the time you're finished with an hour of playing this minigame. Wii Sports got nothing on the exhaustion this will cause. Then of course, you have an equivalent of baseball in here, and even though I generally hate the baseball minigame, the fact that here you're using a steel beam to launch oncoming motorcycles into the stratosphere makes the process a lot more enticing than I'd imagined. I've also mentioned how you can drive around the wasteland in this game, and fortunately, the buggy we drive isn't just wasted on that particular activity, as we can also partake in proper racing. It feels like a logical succession of the driving mechanics in Yakuza 5, but sadly, without the ludicrous heat actions. Still, the vehicle controls a lot smoother here than in the Wasteland, and with the awe-inspiring soundtrack that is present, you'll definitely find yourself going back to the track in due time. Now, I regret to inform you that certain fan-favorite minigames aren't accounted for, such as karaoke and mahjong. Wait, what do you mean people don't like mahjong? As I was saying, while we don't have karaoke here, there is a rhythm-based equivalent present, which in this case relates to the clinic minigame. Here is where you will heal people through music. Oh, and also maybe the pressure point shenanigans, but people mainly focus on the music here. Beyond all of that, Lost Paradise even has a cabaret minigame. And when you consider the character designs in this game, you'll probably want to check it out. At the very least, to say hi to Lyra. So, with everything that I've mentioned up to now, should you actually play this game? Yes. I won't pretend that this is an utterly flawless masterpiece, as there are some design downsides that drag the experience down at times. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy myself all the way through. I was originally on a break from actively playing Yakuza games to prepare for the launch of Gaiden, which you may not have noticed considering my recent upload schedule, but something about this game just made me want to give it a brief go, and that quickly turned into a confident proclamation of going for the platinum in the future. I wouldn't recommend doing that, but considering how we'll probably never get another game like this, I can definitely see myself going back to the world of Lost Paradise, whether it be as a fan of Yakuza or a fan of Fist of the North Star. This year also marks the 5-year anniversary of this game's release, so if you find yourself on the PlayStation Store and see this strange game on sale, I would kindly recommend that you give it a go. It's beautifully unique and charming, whether you're a completionist or just a fan of anything Yakuza. Hopefully, YouTube will be kind to this video and won't turn my channel into the wasteland for daring to speak on it. Oh, and that aside, if all goes according to plan, the RGG Fall Summit should happen 8 days after this upload, and I do intend to cover it in some capacity, so please look forward to it. Anyway, that's all from me today. So, until next time, take care of yourselves and have a great day. Cheers!